Presidente.
Gracias. The sitting is resumed. The minutes of yesterday's sitting and the text adopted are available. Are there any comments? Thank you. So the minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is Commission Statement, Possible Extradition of Paul Watson, the Danger of Criminalisation and Environmental Defenders and Whistleblowers, and the need for their protection in the European Union. First, the Commissioner, Madame KYRIAKIDES, has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, honourable members. Today's debate shows the strong interest of the European Parliament in the key role of environmental human rights defenders and whistleblowers for our democracy. A clean, healthy and sustainable environment is a human right, as recognized by the UN resolution in 2022. That means citizens mobilizing for the protection of the environment can be human rights defenders. They deserve our special attention and our protection. Please note that beyond the specific case of Paul Watson, I will be speaking generally about the environmental human rights defenders and the instruments and measures available in the EU to protect them. Indeed, environmental defenders play a crucial role in safeguarding the environment and ensuring the environmental rule of law. However, in doing so, they sometimes risk attacks and threats in some countries, such as judicial harassment, arbitrary detention, online and offline surveillance, as well as killings. They are essential in promoting democratic values in environmental decision-making. As members of civil society, they collaborate with authorities such as police, inspectors, and other enforcement authorities by reporting environmental crimes, providing evidence, and advocating for accountability. Their efforts are vital in addressing various environmental crimes, such as destruction of protected European wildlife fauna and flora, wildlife trafficking offences, pollution and waste crimes. Environmental human rights defenders should be able to operate in a context where their fundamental rights are respected. The EU and its member states are parties to the Aarhus Convention, which defines procedural rights related to environment, namely access to environmental information, public participation in decision-making, access to justice and legal remedies. These state obligations give citizens and environmental rights defenders an important tool to engage and advocate for the protection of the environment. As policymakers and legislators, we have an important responsibility to protect those that are protecting our values, our human rights, and our environment. In this respect, the European legislative framework was recently reinforced with two new instruments. First, the Anti-SLAPP Directive sets minimum standards for protecting persons and organizations, in particular journalists and human rights defenders, including environmental defenders, on account of their engagement in public participation against manifestly unfounded claims or abusive court proceedings in cross-border civil matters. The second is the new Environmental Crime Directive. Once transposed, these two instruments will strengthen the protection of environmental defenders. The Anti-SLAPP Directive entered into force on 6th of May this year and will have to be transformed by Member States by the 7th of May of 2026. This directive aims to protect people and organizations from manifestly unfounded claims or abusive court proceedings, which are being set up to intimidate and to harass those who defend our values and our societies. The directive lays out a number of procedural safeguards and measures to protect journalists, human rights defenders, including environmental defenders and others, while targeting by abusive court proceedings for their involvement protecting the public interest in matters with cross-border implications. It is complemented by a horizontal Commission recommendation with a broader scope, including pure national SLAPP cases and covering topics such as training, awareness raising, and support mechanisms for potential SLAPP targets and data collections for Member States. Secondly, the new Environmental Crime Directive requires Member States to grant support and assistance to those who report environmental crimes and cooperate with enforcers in criminal proceedings in accordance with national law. It contains provisions to support anyone who reports environmental offences, provides evidence, or in any other way cooperates with competent authorities in criminal proceedings. This cooperation is important as it allows law enforcement and judicial authorities to be more efficient in the fight against environmental crime. Member States are obligated to transpose the Environmental Crime Directive by May 2026. The Commission will continue to cooperate with EU Member States to facilitate the transposition of these two directives. These new pieces of legislation, the Anti-SLAPP Directive and the Environmental Crime Directive, come in addition to the already strong legislative framework for the protection of whistleblowers reporting breaches of EU environmental law. The EU Whistleblowers Directive, adopted in 2019, provides robust protection to persons who report breaches of EU environmental rules that they discover in the context of their work, and for this reason suffer retaliation in the context of their work. As laid out in the EU Guidelines on Human Rights Defenders, the EU is firmly committed to protect human rights defenders at risk globally by enhancing their visibility and recognition and by publicly speaking out against the threats that they face. The EU, through its network of EU delegation, uses a wide range of tools to protect human rights defenders, including public diplomacy, human rights dialogues, campaigns and awards, trial monitoring, and emergency grants. In line with our mandate to protect human rights defenders, the EU set up in 2015 the Protect Defenders mechanism, which has supported more than 60,000 human rights defenders so far. This mechanism includes emergency financial support for human rights defenders that face immediate risk, which can finance a wide range of measures, including legal representation, medical costs, and protection measures. Environmental human rights defenders are amongst the main recipients of this emergency support. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry for going over time.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. A continuación tiene la palabra en representación del Grupo.
The next speaker is Mrs. Pahin on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you also to the Commission for the presentation and for your commitment. I'm sorry that we are here at the very end of our plenary addressing a question of fundamental rights, human rights, which is a foundation of democracy and the rule of law. Here we're talking about the Captain Paul Watson, who is a well-known environmental defender, known for his actions against illegal whaling, but he just represents one of many other people. We are soon to find out whether he's going to be extradited from Denmark on the basis of a notice, an Interpol notice issued by Japan in 2012. So we are talking about the detention in a member state of the EU of an environmental activist for actions linked to the denunciation of crimes which are illegal under international law. Many citizens are protesting against this, protesting at this violation of human rights law, and they are calling on us to take action and also to act against climate change. Scientists are joining their voices to theirs also. So we are here to protect people who are witness to illegal activities or breaches of international law. The Socialist Group has spent much time stressing the need to protect whistleblowers, be they journalists, human rights defenders or women's rights organizations. And we have made progress. We have adopted instruments such as the the Whistleblowers Directive and also anti-SLAPS legislation. But now these have to be implemented. And so we call for a genuine revision to ensure that these rules and regulations do not remain a dead letter. Thank you.
Señora Pajín.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Pajín.
Floor to Madame Joron from the Patriots of Europe group.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Madame.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Today, we're debating the anti-whaling activist Paul Watson, who was arrested in the 22nd of July in Greenland and is awaiting extradition to Japan. His case will be examined on the 2nd of October. Now, this refers to events in the in 2023. There are, as a result of an attack on a Japanese whaling ship. Now, flag states have exclusive jurisdiction over their ships when they're on the high seas. That means that this ship is covered by Japanese law as if it was in Japanese waters. That's the context in which the extradition order was issued in 2012. I don't know Paul Watson, but thousands of people, including Brigitte Bardot, have been active to try and prevent that extradition. He has been working tirelessly to defend whales around the world. We also respect, of course, the legal systems of countries like Japan and Greenland. However, the current, the most recent whaling ship launched by Japan is basically a mass extermination machine. Japan has left the moratorium convention on whaling, and it seems like Japan is just trying to get rid of the strongest defender of whales. This reminds me of a similar case, the case of Julian Assange. He was fighting for freedom and a whistleblower. Since 2012, the Japanese have been after Paul Watson. A European resolution from 2017 condemns the use of Interpol red arrest warrants to try and silence their opponents. Paul Watson's case is an example of this. We have to find the right balance between animal suffering and human traditions. We have to do that in a context of geopolitical tensions. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Renew Europe group, Mr. VEROUGSTRAETE.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Paul Watson, croupi.
Paul Watson has been languishing in jail for weeks. An international arrest warrant was issued by Japan, and that's why he was arrested. And this is linked to the fact that he has been fighting against illegal whaling. So on European soil, we have a whistleblower who's been in jail for weeks, and he's been putting his life in danger to protect the environment, animals, and general interests. Can we accept this? If we don't act, then Paul Watson might spend the next 15 years of his life behind bars in Japan. It is not acceptable. Every day we've got more and more poaching and illegal fishing. More and more species are disappearing. There are more crimes against animals. And we can see that multinationals are destroying biodiversity for profit. If we don't make changes, one day it is human beings who might become extinct, and it will have been our fault. Free Paul Watson.
On behalf of the Green European Free Alliance Group, Madame TOUSSAINT.
Les baleines sont tout simplement...
Whales are quite simply life. They are of staggering beauty, but quite apart from that, their way of life, the biodiversity that they maintain, whales are an indispensable part of marine life and also part of life on Earth. Defending whales, then, is defending humanity in its entirety. Yet, Paul Watson is in danger of extradition from Denmark to a country that not only does not respect the most basic conditions of detention, but also is just flouting international law and is acting as an environmental criminal, because it is Japan that has been condemned by the International Criminal Court for illegal whaling, and it is Japan that continues regardless and hunts an increasing number of whale species for commercial purposes. But who has the power to protect whales? Because whales have rights. Who can raise their voices to protect them? And who has the duty to protect them? It's the international community, and that includes the European community, the European Commission, the European Parliament and Member States. This international community is staying silent today. It is up to us now to stand up and defend the rights of living beings and the rights of those who defend them. The European Union, I think, has to rise to this historic opportunity and take the side of whales, not of poachers, take the side of Paul Watson rather than Japan in this case. So let us rise to the challenge. Let us live up to the expectations of people and international requirements. Let's protect the rules that we ourselves have called for in order to protect the human rights, environmental defenders, and to combat abusive practices. So let's condemn what the Japanese government is doing and stop this extradition. Free Paul Watson.
On behalf of the Left Group, Mr. CLAUSENT.
Selv om sagen handler om Paul Watson.
This is about Paul Watson, but I don't think that it's just about an activist. We're not talking about Mr. Watson as an individual. We're talking about a matter of principle. So we have to speak very clearly. Japan has violated international law and has disrespected international law. So it is Japan that is the baddie in this particular situation. If we were to extradite Paul Watson, then once again we'd be showing that we want to punish those who are taking risks to protect nature and the environment. And this would be unacceptable. We also have to bear in mind that the Japanese legal system is strongly criticized by organizations such as Human Rights Watch. It's almost important to be absolved in Japan. The courts always find against you, and he could even face the death penalty. Paul Watson mustn't be extradited to Japan.
Europe of Sovereign Nations Group, Mr. DROESE.
Herr Präsident,
President, ladies and gentlemen, Bishop Augustinus in the 1400s said, "What is the state other than a huge band of bandits?" If you look at the EU, you can see that Augustinus was a wise man. European law is now only being selectively applied. The climate religion is above else, and eco-terrorists are being declared saintly. One good example of this is Paul Watson. This eco-terrorist has sunk vessels, he's endangered the lives of seamen, and he's broken pretty much every maritime rule that exists. Ships are being blocked, but nevertheless, the so-called civil society on the Greens and the Reds want him to be released. Seems the Commission goes along with that. Even President Macron is suggesting that this terrorist should be released. He even does that united with the left-wing radical Mélenchon. So everybody seems to be calling for the freeing of this terrorist. No difference between Paul Watson and bin Laden. Denmark should extradite him immediately, but Watson is just a small fish. And we know that it's always the head of the fish that stinks the worst. there are quite a number of other crimes before the courts, and I would like to ask the Commission and President von der Leyen about the corruption involved in coronavirus purchasing. What is are the 4 billion euros destined for Egypt? Where's the investigation into the golden visas that von der Leyen clearly still accepts? If you say that bin Laden sets the standard, well, she's pretty much the lead of a band of robbers. She should be before the courts and not in the Commission. It's particularly problematic for my country, Germany. For my German homeland, I think a lot would be better if the alternative for Germany were in power, and I wish my colleagues in Brandenburg the best of luck in the upcoming elections. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. DROESE. Now we move to the second part of the debate, and Madame Corrado has the floor for 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much. Captain Watson, who set up Sea Shepherd, has always been a trailblazer in defending our oceans and has also been fighting against the barbarous tradition of illegal whaling and is now detained in Denmark. He could be extradited to Japan, where, if thrown in prison, could face a disproportionate sentence. He wanted to save some of these wonderful cetaceans, and all this happened 13 years ago upon a Japanese vessel. The EU and Denmark have to take a decision on extradition, but they cannot allow for such an ending to this story when it comes to someone who's been fighting against illegal whaling. We need to protect people like this and not criminalize them. Together with Dario Nardella, we wrote to the Danish ambassador before the EU asking for the release of Paul Watson. Every year, more than 1,000 whales are killed. This is an ecocide, and we're talking about highly intelligent and social creatures that are suffering. They help us deal with climate change, and they provide services for the health of our oceans. We have to put an end to this. Let us release Paul Watson, and let us protect those who protect the environment.
Our next speaker is Mr. NORDQVIST for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I want to emphasize the fundamental principle of fair trial. Japan is demanding the extradition of environmental activist Paul Watson following his arrest in Greenland. The same Japan who has repeatedly ignored international laws on whaling. Now the focus must be on Watson's legal right, and I'm deeply concerned that Denmark may extradite Paul Watson on 2-week of a basis. Do you think that Watson will receive a fair trial in Japan when their motives of silencing him is so evident? I don't think so. Of course, we must ensure that our support reflects international law, but we must also protect those who fight for endangered animals and our environment. If we don't stand up for the whales and for the legal rights of environmental activists, who will? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now our next speaker is Mr. FOURREAU for 1 minute and a half.
C'est une première depuis 1900.
Well, this is a first since 1976. A minke whale was captured, chopped up, and exposed as a trophy on the markets in Tokyo. Now, the IWC considers this to be a vulnerable species. On the 21st of July, Paul Watson was arrested in Greenland, precisely because he and his crew had tried to stop the actions of Japanese whaling ships, which were set to conduct a massacre. This extradition has been requested by Japan and executed by Denmark. Yes, Denmark is active in this. It's the Faroe Islands police that alerted the Greenland police. The Faroe Islands, Greenland and Denmark simply cannot accept this because of the massacres of dolphins that they conduct every single year. This is an act of political vengeance, attacking and tireless defender of the nature. Environmentalists around the world have their eyes on Denmark. Please do not hand this man over to a country that does not defend his human rights. Please defend all environmental activists criminalized and repressed in Europe and around the world. Against the ravages of industrial fishing and hunting on land, let's free Paul Watson.
I've said Mr. FOURREAU. I beg your pardon, Madam. Our next speaker is Madame Riedel for 1 minute.
Monsieur le Vice-président, chers collègues.
Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, Captain Paul Watson is 73 years old and he has dedicated his life to protecting our oceans. The Sea Shepherd visions have helped him protect whales. And despite the fact that he has worked for mankind, he's been in a Danish jail for many weeks and might possibly be extradited to Japan. Japan, the same country that fishes cetaceans, such as the minke whale, that are actually protected. And we only had a case the other day when it comes to minke whale. And it hadn't happened in 50 years. What kind of world do we live in if human rights and environmental defenders are being put behind bars? And those who kill animals are unpunished. So many vertebrate species have disappeared, many of the marine species, and yet despite that we are criminalizing environmental defenders more and more. 2,000 of these defenders have been killed between 2012 and 2022. So the Paul Watson case is not an isolated one. We've got these Interpol orders, but that are being abused. They're there to fight against organized crime and not those who are protecting humanity and animals. Please release Paul Watson.
I turn first place, Mr. Kelly, for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. As the Commissioner said, generally, of course, we have to stand up for whistleblowers, particularly when they're trying to protect the environment. But it's clear that for many years that our nature, our oceans and our environment are all in danger. And if illegal activities are underway throughout the world, we have to stand for the rights of whistleblowers who are pointing these activities out. And this is the case with Paul Watson. Is it right that someone who is trying to point out illegal fishing, is it right that he be in prison? Is it correct that he be extradited to Japan and be brought before the courts there? We need to take a strong stance for people who are fighting in favour of protecting against climate change and we're protecting our environment. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly. Our next speaker for 1 minute is Mr. Germain. Germain. Sorry.
Mes chers collègues,
Dear colleagues, Paul Watson has been held prisoner for 60 days in which he is in danger of extradition to Japan, 60 days during which he's facing spending the rest of his life in prison. It would be being condemned to die in prison. Why? Because no authorities are insisting that the international whaling regulations be properly applied. Japan itself is a signatory to the convention that bans whaling for commercial purposes. It's not Paul Watson who should be condemned, it's the illegal practice of whaling carried out by Japan. As a whistleblower, Madam Commissioner, he should benefit from the protection deriving from the directive of October 2019. So we solemnly urge you, Madam Commissioner, to ensure that the Commission use every means at its disposal to afford him that protection. And we also call on the authorities of Denmark not to extradite him. Paul Watson is not a criminal. Paul Watson has not harmed anybody. He is saving Wales, saving life, protecting and saving future generations. Let's demand his release.
And Madame Bigot, now, excuse me my pronunciation.
Monsieur le Président, la préservation de la biodiversité.
Preserving biodiversity on Earth and in the oceans is necessary for our own survival. Paul Watson has defended all of us through his actions. Through this international arrest warrant, he's threatened with extradition to Japan for having opposed illegal whaling that has been practiced by that country. He's been arrested in Greenland on European soil using judicial procedures to silence activists. This is happening more and more, and it's very problematic. In the case of Paul Watson, it's a red alert from Interpol. That's an abuse of international police cooperation, and that is counter to the statute of Interpol itself. Our environmental protectors should be free, and these procedures have no place in our democracies. Slap proceedings should not be permitted. All citizens who are engaged in environmental causes should be free to have freedom of expression and freedom of reunion. Freedom of association, rather. We should be refusing this extradition of the founder of Sea Shepherd. Denmark should do its bit, and we're waiting for the Commission to also act. Free Paul Watson.
Speaker is Madame Raquette for 1 minute.
I would like to raise a point on Serbia, since it is a candidate to become an EU member state. In August, over 120,000 people protested a planned lithium mine, a project by the Australian company Rio Tinto, which is infamous for its horrendous environmental record. The scale of these environmental protests has led to escalating state-led repression by the Vučić government, with activists facing smear campaigns, unlawful arrests, and increased surveillance. On August 11, during the biggest environmental protests in Belgrade, 3 people were arrested and sentenced for 30 and 40 days, respectively, of prison, in the same day, just to suppress the protests. Over the course of the next 10 days, 33 arrests were made. The most frequent charge was calling for violent change of the constitutional order, which in Serbia means up to 15 years in prison. The government's crackdown is a clear reaction to the growing democratic energy of the protest. I remind you that this parliament has passed a resolution last year on the unlawful elections of Vučić. Serbians have a right to clean air and clean water. They have a right to protest. They have a right to a democracy.
I've been listening to you during your whole minute, and I haven't seen the relationship with the case that we are discussing, the Paul Watson case. But in any case, thank you for your minute. Madam Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, honourable members. Well, this debate clearly shows the significant public interest surrounding this topic. And the Commission, of course, deplores violence, deplores threats, and intimidations against environmental defenders. And we need to stand by and support those who are dedicating their lives to protecting our environment, who are reporting environmental crimes, and cooperate with enforcement authorities. It's not just as a moral duty to these people, but is part of our firm commitment to human rights, including the right to a healthy environment, and to defend the rule of law on which our European society is built. So together with the Member States, we will continue to support civil society through the legal instruments I have already mentioned in detail during my introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. Now we move to the next part of our plenary session,